I'm a bit of a believer that the future is the future and you can create it yourself. No matter how bad the past has been, no matter how dreadful your childhood, no matter how disappointing your life, as of right now, you can change your future. So I think that's one of the great things about Western civilization, but also many of the Asian civilizations as well. They don't live in the past. They accept what has happened. They may not be happy about it, but they know that it's not going to improve their tomorrow if they fret about today what happened yesterday. You see what I mean? Yeah, of course you do. And so one of the great things about Western civilization is that we're not very good at actually the past. I mean, there's a reason why Jacinda Ardern, well, there were two reasons in actual fact, but there was a good reason, and there was the ideological reason that Jacinda Ardern, when she was the Prime Minister, wanted to introduce compulsory history lessons into New Zealand secondary and primary schools. And one of the reasons is because we Westerners, that is, we of European, mostly European descent, and particularly we British, our sense of history really doesn't extend very far, and it's pretty shallow, got to be honest with you. Probably goes back as far as, well, no, I can't say. Every person is different. And we're also not very good at family relationships, Josh. You know, what did Granddad do? Oh, I don't know. If a child asks you, what did your granddad? I don't know.
A lot of people
You know,
wouldn't actually, yeah.
we're dreadful. Now, Maori can go back, can whakapapa back to, I don't know, the creation of the sky god and the earth mother. But Europeans, nah. The British in particular, we can probably get you back to granddad, but dear Lord, great granddad. What happened before then? When did you come here? We don't know. In many ways, you might argue that's a cultural weakness, and in other ways, you might just say far from it. In actual fact, it's a reason why Western civilization is the preeminent civilization on the planet, and has been now for hundreds of years. And it's because we don't live in the past. We don't dwell too much on the maladies that have been inflicted upon us in the present. We move on. And those that do tend to dwell, frankly, on the maladies of the past and the present have an array of, well, frankly, mental health problems that aren't going to give them much of a tomorrow anyhow. You know what I mean? Of course you do. Well, I was thinking that, and why the disparity between the cultures and their sort of te ao view, their world view. I was obviously thinking about that as I was driving around the East Coast. And then I came back on Saturday, and there was Television New Zealand News and Radio New Zealand News, the state broadcasters, with this story that I thought summed up why New Zealand is going to be in trouble in the future, and why there is still a culture that is destined to live in the past in this country and not move on. It was to do with the discovery of, incredibly, an anchor. I know, it's an anchor. But it was discovered in the waters of Doubtless Bay in the far north. And you might have seen this story on Television New Zealand News. I think it was on Saturday night. It was certainly all over Radio New Zealand News, the state broadcaster, over the weekend. The anchor belonged to a French ship, the Saint Jean Baptiste, which was captained by Jean-Francois Marie de Surville, who was an early French explorer of New Zealand, and at one stage was thinking of, in actual fact, appropriating this new land for France. Indeed, one of the reasons that the Treaty of Waitangi, and only one of the reasons, came into being from a British perspective, is we didn't want the French to have the place, even though it really wasn't much use to the British Empire at the time. All right, but de Surville and his crew arrived in New Zealand in 1769. Now, how far ago is 1769, Josh? I did a small calculation before I came on air this morning, and I hope my maths hasn't failed me, but I tell you what, placing that down has 256 years ago. 256 years ago, Josh. De Surville, the French explorer, and his French ship in Doubtless Bay in the far north struck a storm, and they cut an anchor loose, and they lost an anchor for all time. and it's been rediscovered. A third anchor has now been rediscovered. Now, how did Television New Zealand and Radio New Zealand present this amazing piece of news? And, oh gosh, that's a really interesting historical artifact that has been refound, if you like. And the headline runs, Anchor Rediscovery, reopens wounds from early encounter between Maori and European. What? It happened 256 years ago. Yes, but apparently its discovery, quote unquote, on the state broadcasters, plural, has reopened wounds. All right. How's it done that, you might ask? Well, because the chair of Ngāti Kahu, which is a northern tribe, who just happens to be the professor of Maori studies at the University of Auckland, her, Margaret Mutu, said that the crew of the St. Jean Baptiste arrived in Doubtless Bay, according to her oral history, in great disarray, and that they were nursed back to health by members of Ngāti Kahu, so it seems to be a very positive encounter, but they then turned on Ngāti Kahu, ransacked their settlement, kidnapped a local rangatira named Ranganui, who later died of thirst and scurvy on board the St. Jean Baptiste, and that the kidnapping was a portent of what was soon to occur. So it didn't turn out so well in the end, at least from a Maori oral perspective. So they discover the anchor, all right, and so Ngāti Kahu decide, led by Margaret Mutu, that we are not going to put it anywhere or say, wow, this is an interesting archaeological artifact. We want to leave it unbidden somewhere in the earth and forget about it because, well, we get a little bit ignored, as according to Margaret Mahu, that people came into our territory 256 years ago. We welcomed them, we nursed them back to health, we saved them, they did the dirty on us, and now they're coming back and telling us we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do the other. Heritage New Zealand has recommended the site of the anchor remained undisturbed until tangata whenua have been consulted more, and the area can be assessed by a professional archaeologist. But there's Margaret Mutu in the 21st century, good God, 25 years into the 21st century, still carrying a grievance, which apparently has been reopened, that particular wound or scar, 256 years after the event. Now, if we can't get on from 1840, dear Lord, apparently we can't even get on from 1769. And it just goes to show that there is one particular part of a culture, and I'm not going to say all Maori live in the past at all. I'm not going to say that. Because I think that the Margaret Mutus of this world are the fifth columnists of a sort of Marxist agenda in this country. And that's why they're in academia, and particularly at Auckland University, you'd have to say. But putting all that to one side, there are a series of Maori leaders and activists, and remember, it's not just her academic position, but her position within her iwi, within her tribe, that are prepared to still use historical encounters of 256 years ago to continue a grievance long into the 21st century. It's an extraordinary story. Good God, what was the world like in 1769? I know, Margaret Mutu, that Maori society wasn't too flash, full of cannibalism, full of violence, full of warfare, and a very short lifespan, and not an awful lot, you'd have to say, of technological innovation. In fact, seem to be going backwards as a culture, considering their forebears who'd got here 500 years previously, and certainly not great environmentalists because they were destroying the flora and fauna long before Europeans even sighted this land. But I just want to say that if the future of this country is that we cannot celebrate the past, commemorate it, or in any way just acknowledge it, because it causes a grievance to be opened from 256 years ago, this country is stuffed. Those are my thoughts this morning. What are yours?